We heard a lot about AI in the last 2 or 3 sessions. Just bringing it down now to more human behavior. So we have an amazing panel here of experts. So I'm going to introduce them. First up is Dr. Clare Purvis. She's a clinical psychologist turned product leader. Claire has built and scaled evidence-based digital health experiences at companies like Headspace and Google, and now mentors rising leaders through her venture Well, W-E-L-L, all caps. She specializes in translating behavioral science into real-world product decisions, designing for motivation, habit formation, and well-being while safeguarding user dignity. Claire will ground our conversation in ethical experimentation and the craft of building cross-functional teams that make responsible nudging a repeatable capability. Next up is Dr. Michael Hallsworth. Michael is a chief behavioral scientist at the Behavioral Insights team, BIT, and a co-author of some of the field's most influential frameworks, Mindspace, East, and behavioral government. He's run large-scale trials with governments and enterprises across the globe and writes widely on how to diagnose friction, design simple interventions, and evaluate them with rigor. Michael can filter the latest evidence through the lens of what's feasible in practice. Very unique backgrounds for this audience, for sure. And then we have Jessica Bernat, customer of ours, as the Director of Digital and Sustainer Marketing at the Canadian Red Cross. Jessica leads the teams behind high-stakes digital fundraising, where speed, empathy, and flawless execution turn intent into impact during moments that matter. She's scaled sustainer programs, optimized forms and payment flows, and aligned channels to drive durable growth in online revenue. Jessica will share the operator's view, like many of you in the audience, with tweaks actually move conversion and retention, how to test under crisis pressure, and how to keep donor experience ethical and human at scale. So very accomplished panel and a very interesting topic. Hopefully by the end of this, there are enough takeaways for all of you to back to your orgs and test them out. I wanted to talk with Claire and Michael. There is a lot of talk about nudges and pushes, right? And we had this animated conversation about the micro versus a macro. So I'm going to ask Claire to start on this topic.
And I'm going to actually kick it. I would love for Michael to tell us what a nudge actually is, what nudging actually is, and then I'll share my thoughts on
okay.
it.
So a nudge, right? This is often used as a term, and what it basically means is a way of framing choices so that people are more likely to choose a particular option based on our psychology, but without constraining choice, without forcing people to do it, and without changing their economic incentives, like the costs and benefits. The reason this is popular is because it's kind of easy to describe. It was appealing both to people who didn't want to force people to do things, but also people who wanted to give people a nudge in a particular direction. The reason why we don't always talk about this is because it's just one way of doing things. It's deliberately constrained. It's deliberately limited. You can't change a law. You can't change how much, you can't fine someone, for example. You can't give them a big carrot. And of course, those things also matter. So behavioral sciences, we use it as more of a process where we look at the context, we take evidence about human behavior, and we try and apply it. And nudges is just one way of doing that.
Yeah, and one that I think we hear so much about because it's a really interesting topic. There's some really cool anecdotes and studies and evidence about nudges, and it's of course like a very interesting tool that we have in the toolkit. But most of my work, as we were talking about, I work a lot with behaviors that need to happen repeatedly, sustainably, over time, things that part of us wants to do, things to promote our health, manage our health, engage in exercise, eat right, take our medications. But in the moment, we don't always feel like doing it, right? And so we have to repeatedly build this habit of changing our behavior over time or changing our lifestyle, which I think has some generalizability to other types of repeated behaviors that many folks in this group probably want to drive. And if we only talk about nudging or only think about, what's the micro intervention we could do, we sort of miss this big picture of all the ways we can change behavior.
It's like a nudge is putting the fruit at the front, so you're more likely to take it. Whereas what you're talking about, Claire, is like more long-term, how do you change someone's diet sustainably?
Exactly. Which is going to maybe involve that, and then maybe a whole bunch of other techniques and interventions we could use.
Thanks for that perspective. So the first segment, we'll talk about anchors and defaults, guided versus game. Show of hands, how many of you have gone to a restaurant without thinking about wine but ended up getting wine, ordering wine? Quite a bit. So wine is the most profitable product for any restaurant, right? And so think of defaults. When you walk into the restaurant, before even sitting at the table, wine glasses are already there. So it's kind of saying, that's a social norm for you to have wine. It's called a wine list, right? So it's not alcohol list or drinks list, it's wine list. And if you go around the table, there is food menus in front of everybody, but there is only one wine list, right? And so what's going to happen, everybody on the table is going to say, okay, somebody is good with wine, why don't you choose? And then the question is really red or white, whatever the choice. So there are so many subtle things that happen to lead you to order wine, even if you didn't think about ordering wine that particular evening. So on that question, right, how, and one of the frameworks that Michael has, the EASE framework, it talks about easy, attractive, social, and timely, right? So we want to use that for this topic, but Jessica, can you, talk about defaults and how you drive donor behavior, whether it's for one-time or recurring donors?
Yes, I could probably talk about wine just as long, but I think a couple examples, and just starting with the basics, like since transitioning from a very high friction online donation experience to a very simple, easy to use donation form, we used to be so afraid to change our gift matrix, which is kind of like anchoring, I think. We would highlight the $75, we would never change it, we were too afraid. And it resulted in a certain average gift over a long period of time. And when we switched platforms and we started using AI and even turning it off for higher value donors and really playing around with our donation amounts, specifically for one-time giving, we've seen a 5% increase in our average gift, not doing anything else. And over the course of a year, I think it's over $2 million increase. So just little things like that can have a big impact. And monthly giving is another big area of focus for the Canadian Red Cross. Now I forget my example.
With the choice?
No.
It's
Monthly. There's a
okay.
good example.
Come back.
I'll let them talk and I'll think of it.
So Michael, can you talk about, what is the line between smart anchoring and manipulation?
What's the difference between smart anchoring and manipulation? Start with an easy one. Okay. So I think there are two ways of answering that. One is what's the right thing to do and what's going to backfire, because they're kind of different. So backfire, what you have to think about is when will people feel reactance? When will people feel that there's a loss of control, that they're being forced into something? And in psychological terms, we call this reactance. It's like that there's an attempt to constrict what you're doing here, you don't like it, and you push back at it, you cancel, for example. You can avoid that happening with some choices. For example, you mentioned, I think, anchoring there, about what is an appropriate donation. If that anchor seems to be completely arbitrary, and you just made it up because you wanted the maximum, people may sense that and feel reactions that you're treating me as a means, not an end. You don't care about who I am and my goals here. You're just trying to maximize. Whereas if you compare the anchor to like an in-group, a group that's relevant to that person, that feels more appropriate. So you can minimize the risk there, really.
So more personalized to that.
Yeah, so here's a study we did some years ago. When people were coming up with a will, we did an experiment where we said to some people, would you like to make a donation or leave money to charity in your will? And that led to a certain level of donation. We had a 15% increase when we said, do you want to donate to a cause that you're passionate about? Okay, so that was that push, that nudge, but it didn't take it away from the person. It kind of went into that person's intentions and worked with them.
Got it. Claire, on the same topic, or another way, guided versus gamed?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with kind of building on what Michael was saying. When we think about behavior change, this is actually attention. How many people have used an app where maybe it's like Spotify where you're picking songs, or anything where there's a library and you have all these options of things that you can use? Anyone use Headspace, Calm, Spotify? Yeah. So guidance is typically, like when we think about it in a digital experience, how do I help make it easy for you to get what you're looking for you to do the thing that it is that you want to do, really smooth that experience out for you. And that feels like, you hop on the walking tour at the museum and you get guided through all the best pieces that you want to see according to your interests, right? Gamed feels like, how do I trick you before you realize it into doing something that benefits me? And people feel the difference, right? And so there is a real balance with when we're guiding an experience to say, you still get to choose. You still have all the pieces of content, for example, you could pick from, or all the options on the menu that you could pick from. But we're going to make it easy to go down this path because you've indicated it's what you want. You could change if you want to. Gamed is, you can't see anything else but this path that I want you to go on. And you feel, to Michael's point, the constraint and the loss of freedom. And we often see reactive cancellations or churn from that.
I just think
That's very related to the example I was going to share, which is with monthly upsells and nudges and how you frame that in your donation experience. I think we could compare. I've tested using, before we even went live with this, used a usability testing platform called UserBob, and we tested how we were going to push monthly donations. So version 1 was going fully monthly first on all, that's talking about our main web form, like everyone who comes to your website, going monthly first, and if they do want to make a one-time gift, you would have to switch it. Option 2, we did starting with a one-time gift, but we have the little heart on monthly. I've seen other orgs have little like underlines or little statements about why you should give monthly, and then doing a mid-donation upsell to a monthly gift. So start a one-time, thanks for donating 100, how about making it $75 a month or something? And then the third option was 2 nudges, so doing one time first, the mid upsell to monthly, and then also doing if you decline that, it would also ask you again at the end, post-donate. Apparently that's gaming. People did not like that. So we ended up going with option 2. But again, just by having that live, that upsell, and I think the AI might determine when and how it gets shown or which donors see it, and some don't, if you're over a certain dollar value or something. But in 1 year, we get 500 or 600 new monthly gifts converted just by having that on. And I was talking to Kelly earlier about our face-to-face cost to acquire a new donor is like $470, times that by 500 gifts, it's $250,000. So it's little nudges and things that you can do with your online donation experience can make a really huge impact.
Thank you very much. I was just thinking I'm a TikTok addict. Whether I'm being guided or gamed, I'm not sure. We can discuss or drink.
I think we know the answer to that.
We'll move on to emotion that converts and builds relationships, right? So guilt, gratitude, and urgency. All of them work, but at different times. Loss aversion, fear of missing out, and so on. So, Michael, can you talk to us about how pointing out a gap between people's principles and their giving behavior may work, and when it may not?
Yes, like self-image and current behavior. So I'm going to put this with a warning because it can work or it can backfire. So we know that it can be effective to point out a gap between current behavior and your stated principles. And it can be done in subtle ways. So there's a study from Australia where they're looking at people buying tickets, and they get this suggestion, do you want to donate while they're buying the ticket? If you could just click proceed, then the donation levels were a certain amount. But if the choice was I've already donated or I don't want to donate, that led many more people to choose the option of donating. Okay, so if the alternative to donating was saying I don't want to or I've already donated, that actually led to some kind of conflict, and people wanted to avoid directly saying that they didn't want to donate because it kind of conflicted with their self-image. The reason why I'm concerned about this a bit is it can be powerful under some instances. So you can really point out the distinction quite strongly. I got a book coming out next week, which I have here, all about hypocrisy. It's called The Hypocrisy Trap. And the reason I mention this is there's a technique called induced hypocrisy, where what you basically do is you say to someone, you get them to make a public commitment that they believe in a cause, okay? Say like cyberbullying, I'm against cyberbullying. And then you point out to them privately all the times they didn't act in line with that principle. When you do this in the study, I mentioned the book, it increased donations to an anti-cyberbullying charity. But it can go wrong. For example, there's another one where, in Paris, I seem to remember, it was about trying to reduce the use of plastic bags. If you get people to sign a commitment to use fewer plastic bags, that kind of works. If you do that plus get them to think of times when they didn't follow through on that commitment, that actually is less effective. The key seems to be you make the public commitment, but talk to people in private. Give people space to change. Rather than, because if you do it in public, you confront someone, you get that reactance. You get that kind of like need to defend and preserve your status. And indeed, this seems to be like a time-bound thing. You have a window of opportunity where you can convert in that point someone's behavior to change. Because the alternative is you just change your attitudes and say, well, actually, I didn't really believe that. As my behavior suggests, I don't really care about that cause. But it seems like in that short period of time, you can secure an additional donation. You've just got to be very careful to avoid that reactance.
On the same token, Jessica, I know you guys fundraise for Canadian wildfires and other emergencies. How do you translate that from your perspective?
I think what I find time and time again is urgency always wins. It wins in an appeal when things are urgent and people want to help or they respond. But even during a campaign when we're raising unrestricted funds, we see a peak at the beginning, and then the big peaks come at the end. And I'll use Giving Tuesdays coming up. That's our biggest single day. We raise the most money in one day. Last year, we raised over $2 million from 12,000 donations. And people wait, like we send maybe 12 emails in that one day, and all like 75% of the money comes in at 8, 9, 10 p.m. So I find it fascinating that we procrastinate.
Claire, your thoughts on this topic?
Well, I really echo what my colleagues are saying. I think my one guidance, I suppose, would be that urgency is really powerful. Both urgency and scarcity work well when they are genuine. I think kind of getting back to that guided and that feeling of being gamed, we also, I don't know if anyone's had this experience where you land on a website and there's a big countdown timer of, this deal is expiring. There's actually a software tool that I use that I won't name because I actually really do like them. But they do this on their main website. They have a big countdown timer that says upgrade to Pro, deal expiring soon. That timer is up every single time you open that website. It never goes away. And it's not personalized to my behavior of when I landed on the page. So it's clear that this is a fake. They're trying to twist my arm, right? They're trying to make me think it's urgent, but it's not. And people are smart, they figure that stuff out. So I think they're powerful when they're real and they're genuine, and there really is, say there's a timely cause, or there really is a deadline to this campaign. Helping people remember that can absolutely spur behavior, but it can totally backfire if it's not true and it's manipulative.
Yeah. Great points. So we move on to the next one, which is around friction. Friction helps and in some ways and sometimes it doesn't, right? So the two examples I have are, if you make address mandatory when you're giving a donation, right? That's something that we have tested. And you can see that if you make it not required, it increases conversion by 3.4%, right? So friction in that case is bad. But what we found is when somebody donates, you send them an email with the receipt. Now, we used to send a PDF attachment to the receipt. There is a missed opportunity there, right? And so we changed it to a link that a donor has to click now to get to the donor portal and then be able to download the receipt. But now you have an opportunity to engage with that donor. So you added friction, but it's overall good, for the org and hopefully for the donor, right? So I'll start with you, Claire. Can you talk on this topic about how you can use friction wisely?
Yeah, I think maybe the part I'll focus on, I love the idea of helpful friction. And I think with digital experience design, we've learned a lot about where to think about that in your flow. I'm curious, has anyone ever unsent an email? Yeah. So you have experienced helpful friction. One way to think about helpful friction is it tends to show up, be most useful in places where we're protecting the user from their own impulses, protecting them from their own mistakes, or helping make sure that they're certain about a high-risk decision. A lot of times if you're placing an online trade, you're going to get a little pop-up that says, are you sure? Are you sure you want to make this transfer? Are you sure you want to place this trade? So it kind of gets at this bigger theme. And when we think about this sort of a technique like introducing friction in a flow, the principle I would remember or think about is this is serving the user's intention, right? And our approach and mindset that we're taking is ultimately, yes, we want you to engage in a behavior that's going to be beneficial for our organization, but we want to do that from the foundation of serving your best intention as well, which is ultimately feeding a relationship of trust between you and the end user or the donor. So any place where you're engaging with end users where there is the possibility they could make a mistake on something that will be costly to them, or there's the possibility that there's an impulse that they're going to click through something that doesn't ultimately take them in the direction they want to go. Think about where friction can help serve their interest and yours, but yours in the long term, not right now in this moment, but this long-term relationship that you want to have with the user and build that trust.
Got it. Michael, you want to go next on this?
Okay, so I'm just going to not talk about charitable giving for a second and talk about two other examples. And I want to use a comparison. So about 13 years ago, there was a big controversy in New York. Some of you may remember that Michael Bloomberg was proposing to ban big gulp, large sodas. So you in principle, could go and buy as much soda as you want. You just couldn't buy a really big one in one go. And this policy eventually died. It was a big mobilization against it. It was quite unpopular, or at least it seemed to be. That's one comparison. Another one is if you go back 15 more years, the end of the 90s, in the UK, they changed the law around painkiller packaging. If you go to the UK and you try and buy painkillers, you can't get big tubs like you can in the US because they made it so you can't get more than a certain, I think it's 16 in a pack. They're generally in blister packs. And you can't buy more than 2 in a shop. This policy saved about 800 lives in the decade after it was introduced. It was not very controversial. My point of comparing these two is if you are thinking about them in the abstract, they're exactly the same in terms of freedom and like paternalism and friction. You're stopping people, you make it harder, you're introducing friction. But we feel very differently about them because the level of harm is very different. We're talking about like, is the change or the consequence irreversible, for example? Is it something you're potentially going to regret later? And there are 4 things I just want to, it's a really simple framework for thinking about behavioral science and ethics. One aspect of it is manipulation. So to what extent, I just have to remind myself this, it's in a book I wrote back, get this right. To what extent are people aware of the attempt to influence themselves? To what extent is it transparent? And that can be transparent in terms of like, someone's trying to influence me, I know what they're trying to make me do, and I know how they're doing it. The second aspect is, how far can people resist that? How can they, avoid the attempt to influence them? Second category is all about paternalism. To what extent are you doing what people want you to do? To what extent are you making a choice for them? And there you have to think about, what are people's existing preferences? Is there good evidence that they want this thing to happen from what we know about them? Do we have good evidence for that? And the second thing is the point I mentioned about the big gulp ban versus painkiller. What are the consequences? What's the harm? And who suffers that harm? Those four things are a way of looking at each case by case rather than the abstract. Because if you talk about abstractions, you get caught up in like big gulp bang and the painkillers are the same thing, but they're not. Ability to resist, transparency, strength of preferences, and harm.
Cool. Jessica, you have any examples around friction you'd like to share?
No, I think the experts covered it.
We'll do one more topic. We're going to run out of time. So this is, we'll talk about social proof and reframing, right? So I'm sure many of you get these kind of emails, but my electric company sends an email, I don't know, every quarter, I think, basically saying, hey, in like-sized houses in your neighborhood, you are below average, right? That gets me riled up, right? Because I take a lot of pride in turning the AC off when my family wants the AC on, and you're wasting money and the rest of it, right? So it certainly has an impact. So that's one. And then from a reframing perspective, this is an example of Shreddies. It's a cereal. It's a square cereal, and then they just turned it by 45 degrees, and that skyrocketed their sales, right? And so how can such reframing be applied from a donation perspective? So you can pick whichever you want to talk about. Claire, you want to go first?
Sure. I think, we talked a lot about like social comparison. And we even talked about comparison to your own past behavior, which I think is really interesting. Honestly, maybe I'll kick it over. I feel like we were gonna have you chat a little bit about social comparison and how that's been important, not only
Was
for
it the Strava
It was a
example?
Strava example, yeah.
Yeah, on a personal, I'm not sure if that's good for my mental health or not, but just sites like Strava or logging your food in FitnessPal, or we talked a lot about different streaks that you can get, and thinking about online or donation behavior. We haven't done a ton of testing. I think in the Canadian marketplace, even we're afraid to talk too much to monthly donors. We're afraid to remind them that we don't send them monthly installment receipts. We don't communicate with them as much because we didn't want to remind them. We didn't want them to unsubscribe. I'm probably changing topics a little bit, but this one's more exciting for me. But it's been a huge, I don't know if it's just the Canadian Red Cross or all of Canada and just monthly giving in general. It is one of the areas that's growing still compared to one-time giving. So it's an area that we're really investing in and understanding and trying to grow. And the whole subscription model, like obviously it works. Like I have subscriptions to like my greens that I get sent to me once a month, and I go in to cancel every few months, and I end up just skipping or pausing or feeling guilty that I'm not going to get my greens anymore. So we're really trying to adopt that model with our monthly giving program. We're in the process of migrating all of our even offline monthly donors into our donation platform so that they can have the self-serve dashboard and functionality and upgrade, downgrade. And I don't have the results yet, so we don't know what it's going to bring, but we feel super strongly and excited about what that will offer to donors and how different it is from how we've operated in the past.
Yeah.
Well, you're talking a lot about the autonomy that you feel, like with your own green subscription too, to say, I don't have to cancel per se, but I could skip, I could pause, I can control how this works. And I think that's really huge for managing churn. it kind of gets at this whole thing we're talking about around trust and autonomy and not triggering reactance. And yeah, I love that example. I've done the same thing.
I just want to say I was a fan of shreddies before they were cool, before they got rotated. Yeah. Anyway, right. So just one quick thing about social norms. We often talk about social norms as in we're influenced by what other people do. So like I did a whole set of experiments when I was in the UK government around 9 out of 10 people pay their tax on time. You're one of the few that hasn't. And that brought in real money. But in charitable giving, we have to be a bit careful because you can be in instances where that doesn't work because you're trying to emphasize that actually few people have donated. It's a bit like if you think about giving blood. If you go around saying 9 out of 10 people have given blood, that's not very effective because, well, you can just free ride then, no problem, okay? So the work that Wikipedia has done, you may be aware of it, has done extensive testing to show that actually the emphasis on how few people have donated is much more effective. So I just make this point in terms of we have principles which we talk about, which are generally true, but the testing in your particular donation environment is really important.
Thank you. So one last question before we go to Q&A. One idea of an experiment or suggestion that the audience can take away and experiment in their orgs for each of you.
Yeah, I was thinking about this a little bit. I think one of the, I'm very aware one of my behavioral science mentors is in the audience who talks about this all the time. But I think one of the most powerful intervention mechanisms that we often forget about is identity when it comes to behavior change. So I might think about some ways you could experiment with simple messaging that triggers identity frames for your donors. This could be as simple as in your thank you follow-up emails and messaging. You could have something simple like thank you for your donation, but if you wanted to trigger an identity frame, you might say thank you for being the kind of person who supports XYZ cause. Thank you for being the kind of person who shows up when it matters. Thank you for being, you fill in for your context. But thinking about ways that you can start to introduce, how do I activate identity, the kind of person I am, or even in some cases, the kind of person that I am opposed to, that I'm not this person, right? Depending what your cause is. And you can really think about simple communication-based tools to do that through emails, through messaging, and simply pointing it out is one way to activate that frame and then see what you can experiment with there to see how that might drive different repeated giving or even one time. I'd be super curious to find out what people learn there.
Go ahead.
For me, I think what's really important is there's not one single test that I would recommend that has really worked, or it's testing all of the different things. There's so many different ways you can reframe, nudge. Funders Up has a ton of different elements, just constant testing. But my honest recommendation would be to build, and we're trying to do this right now, is build a test and learn framework and methodology and base it in behavioral science because it gives you something to base it on. I feel like constantly my team's like, we want to test this, we want to test that. And I'm like, well, why? What's it going to tell us? What are we going to learn? And it's hard to have, you could just be testing forever if you get a bunch of digital marketers in the room. So we're building this whole methodology, trying to base it in behavioral science and building an actual tool like Google Looker Studio or something like that, where you can record all the testing, whether it's UX, copy, donation elements, just consolidating it all in one place and being able to go back to the learnings consistently and see what's working, what's not. And yeah, that's what I would recommend.
A strong agreement with those two. I think it is worth having a go at induced hypocrisy. We do know that induced hypocrisy works in many different settings. It's just can be a bit like an explosive material. You don't want to get it wrong. So that's why the testing is very important. It's powerful, but you want to get the mixture right.
Thank you, all of you. Do we have time for questions? 2 questions.
No pressure. Okay. I just had a question related to the thing you mentioned about streaks. Does that work? I mean, does that work with monthly donors to tell them like you're on a streak? Is that?
No. Well, I haven't really tested it. We're afraid of streaks, I think. We're we're playing. I think it depends what your CRM captures too, and if there's any errors or if that's not really clean data, you could hurt yourself more than anything. So, to be honest, I haven't tested streaks with our monthly program yet.
Hi, my name is Lizzie. I work at Mozilla Foundation. Thank you. This was super interesting. I love hearing about the human side of things. My question is related to just like what you guys think behaviorally about when we offer kind of like a piece of merch, like a sticker or a hat. Like, would love to just hear more about how that kind of like people internalize that in their brains, because like we have seen it work for our organization. So we'd just love to hear some further insights about how that works, and maybe like also, when does it not work? Like if you start overusing it, would just love to hear more. Thanks.
Yeah. Who doesn't love a treat? I love a treat. External, so we would think about that as an external reward or an extrinsic reward, right? Which can be really low cost, delightful, fun ways to reward the behavior that you're looking for. I think sprinkled lightly, I would think of it as a delight mechanism, right? As a sort of an added treat, a bonus, an extrinsic reward, where I've seen it backfire, maybe not backfire in the scientific sense, but maybe seen it not work, is when we think that extrinsic reward in and of itself will drive an ongoing behavior. So that's where we want to think more with more complexity about behavior change, to say, what is the person's inherent motivation to engage in this behavior? Where does it come from? What drives that? And how do we continue to activate that? And you can layer in gamification types of techniques like extrinsic rewards to help keep that going and to bring in some more delight and some more positive reinforcement. But sometimes I've seen teams start to think, even in like designing online experiences, they're only thinking about the coins and the rewards and how you cash it in for merch or this type of thing. And they think in and of itself, oh, I'm going to keep doing this for the hat or the sticker. You're not going to do it for the hat or the sticker in and of itself, right?
Just another frame of that is reciprocity. And what you talked about there is like direct reciprocity, where you give me something, I do something for you. But it's just worth bearing in mind, there's also something called indirect reciprocity, which is where you do something for someone else because they've helped someone else. Or you do something for someone else because someone helped you. Direct, indirect reciprocity. And I think it's worth thinking about the networks with indirect reciprocity that can help your organization.
Well, a fascinating topic and amazing panelists here. So round of applause for the great insights. Thank you very much.